Village. This is your weekly live talk show where community and support come together. With rotating hosts, expert guests, and meaningful conversations, we're here to guide you through the highs and the lows of infertility. Whether you're searching for answers, seeking advice, or just looking for a special place to belong, Fertility Village is your space to connect, learn, and grow. Because it really does take a village, and we are here for you every step of the way. Thanks for joining. Welcome to Fertility Village. This is your weekly...
I think we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Fertility Village Live. I'm Marissa, one of your co-hosts, and Joy.
I'm Joy, your other co-host. We're so glad you're joining us tonight for a really meaningful conversation on LGBTQIA+ family building and donor conception.
Tonight's guest is someone we are so excited to speak with. We have the lovely Sam Marple here, Chief Operating Officer of Reproductive Solutions. Sam is a leader in the fertility space, a parent to a donor-conceived child, and someone who's helped expand and diversify donor egg parenting options for LGBTQIA+ families.
Her personal and professional perspectives make her the perfect person to explore this topic with. Sam, welcome to Fertility Village Live.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Of course. And again, thank you for being here. We'd love to start by getting to know a little bit more about you. Who are you? What's your background? We know you worked at an egg donor bank. So if you can give us a little bit of that and how that led into your role now as Chief Operating Officer at Reproductive Solutions. And we want to know about your path to parenthood. So we want to know it all. So give it all. Give it to us all. We're ready.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well,
we have somebody, Heidi, is saying that you're a rock star.
That's very kind. Yeah. So jumping right in, I fell into the fertility space purely serendipitous, to be quite honest. Prior to my fertility life, I was actually in emergency medicine and I was going through a life change. I had just gotten married and we relocated to the DC area and I saw an opening for an egg bank and I thought, that seems pretty cool. I was used to working on ambulances and dealing with a lot of loss of life. And so the thought of being able to kind of give back in that way was really exciting to me. And I had heard of sperm banking and I knew one day I was likely going to need a sperm bank to help conceive my family. But egg banking was actually relatively new at the time. And so it was kind of foreign to me, but I was really excited to have the opportunity. And, I learned from a lot of fantastic people in the industry who have been doing this a long time. And I started with Fairfax Egg Bank at its infancy and grew along with the bank. And and I, served with them for almost a decade. And that was a really amazing experience. And then simultaneously went through my own parent journey. We knew we were going to need a sperm donor and we really evaluated a lot of different options and highly considered using somebody we knew. And that just didn't pan out. And so I was fortunate enough to have the experience from the inside and understanding what donor conception looks like from a bank perspective. And so I felt like I was equipped with a lot of knowledge that otherwise I perhaps wouldn't have been. And we ended up going through a donor bank for our son, and we were able to create embryos, and my son is turning 5 in July. So it's been an amazing journey.
How has your perspective evolved over the years, especially as a parent of a donor-conceived child?
It's always funny. Becoming a parent in general is always, your perspective is changing constantly. I have learned so much from my professional career, and I've learned a tremendous amount from the donor conceived community. And it's a part of the fertility space that's under recognized truly and really there's so much work still to be done in that space. And, my son was already here when I started to learn more about the donor conceived community. And I had the, I had the opportunity to learn a lot and listen to a lot of donor conceived adults who had gone through various journeys themselves. And I learned a lot from that experience. I wanted to take what I learned there and ensure that I was doing the best I could as a parent to ensure that I was being transparent with my son. Being in a queer relationship, you don't have, you're not really able to kind of hide disclosing in the same way as heterosexual relationships. So we always knew we were gonna disclose, but it was helpful to learn from the folks who lived it themselves, kind of what the best practice is and what was helpful for some people. And really best practice across the board is early and often, talking to your child early and often about their, who they are. It's a part of who they are. And hiding it is really, is proven to be problematic in the long run. But also language is really important and it's really difficult. And there's not a playbook of how to have these conversations or, what language you should use. Some people are very uncomfortable with some of the words that are being used in the donor community. So like dibblings is one example, donor siblings, right? Some people really do not like that terminology and other people are okay with it. So I think it's important to learn and listen to folks who have been through it and kind of figure out what works well for you. And for us, we knew we wanted to not only be transparent, of course, at the time, ID donors or ID disclosed donors were still relatively new in the sperm banking space when we chose our sperm donor. But it was a non-negotiable for us to be able to have that option. And so we did go with an ID donor. Luckily, there's a lot of forward change and even going a couple of steps further in having more open ID and mutual, matching and things of that nature. And so I definitely think we're making progress, but there's still a lot of progress to be made. And we've connected with a lot of families and that have used our donor. And we're in a group with probably about 20 different families from all over the world. And it's really amazing to see those kids and to watch them grow from afar and to talk to the parents. And it's helpful from a medical standpoint because you're able to share, hey, we're having this experience. Did you guys have that with your kid? Is this something that maybe we need to pay attention to from the donor side? And then also for the relationships, we have another family that we're extremely close with. And we see them at least twice a year and we've done vacations with them and our boys have a really strong bond and they're like our own family. I'm not even related to those kids, but I feel like they're my kids when I see them. And it's a really beautiful thing. And I'm lucky to be a part of it, but there's still so much work to do. And I know we're not doing it perfectly, but we're working really hard to do the best we can.
Yeah. And I think it's people like you who are willing to put this conversation out there and to be somebody who's going to really lead the conversation and share their stories that are making it possible to kind of do that work, right? So thank you for sharing all of that, of course. I think in general, there's a lot of, if you Google, you will get a million responses as to how donor eggs, donor sperm, donor embryos, how that all works, especially in Canada. So can you give us, because you've worked, at egg banks before, and this is your space, can you give us a little bit more about how the donor process works, how it would work for eggs as opposed to sperm, and maybe even embryos in the Canadian space, and then how it would work if it would work differently for LGBTQIA plus families, or if it would be kind of a similar kind of process.
Yeah, the landscape in Canada is a bit different, but not by much, right? Not when it comes to your donor selection and what that process looks like. In comparing sperm and egg, ultimately it's very similar, right? You're choosing somebody to, to grow your family with, and it's a very personal decision. Interestingly, I found that the emotional connection in some instances, and of course these are general statements, so it doesn't apply to everybody, but I've found that there seems to be less of an emotional connection or investment when people are choosing sperm donors and egg donors. Not in every circumstance, but I've witnessed it quite a lot, and I've always found that interesting. And I also think it depends on the person's journey or the couple's journey as well, right? And so, I think in egg donation specifically, there's still so much work to be done for the LGBTQ community to have access to care. And when you're looking at gay men, they don't just need an egg donor. They also need a surrogate. And that's a big investment. It's a big investment for anybody. But it's an even bigger investment when you need both. And so because of that, we actually saw a very small percentage of same-sex male couples going the donor egg route, less than 5%. And that's huge in comparison to the amount of volume that donor banks are doing, across the world. So I think access to care continues to be a limiting factor for folks, and it's really quite an investment. So that's been interesting, and there are women, whether it be heterosexual or same-sex relationships, that need eggs, and so we'd see our fair share of LGBTQ women as well who needed donor eggs because they were advanced maternal age or other things. And I think in those instances, I think it's a little bit different when you kind of grow up, or at some point in your life that you're going to need a donor. You just kind of always understand that, right? And I think when you're having to grieve the loss of your own genetic material and being told you cannot use your eggs and then having to use a donor, I think there's another layer there, and I think it makes that a lot. I think it's a more challenging experience to go through. But I mean, what it comes down to when people are choosing their donor, generally they're looking at the same kind of things. Does this person fit with my family? They're looking at physical criteria, whether or not they're ID or not, or whatever options now exist. Those are huge decisions to make. And, again, best practice is to have somebody that can be identified at some point. So I think, more and more banks are starting to understand the importance of that and moving in that direction. And some banks have gone completely ID and no longer have non-ID donors. But there are still lots of banks that do. So it's a balance. But I think, those are big decisions, and also understanding what that actually means. So just because a donor has agreed to be contacted when the child turns 18, doesn't mean that it's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee. And it's really important to understand that and understand what that process looks like with the banks you're working with. So, what is the bank doing to upkeep the most recent information? But ultimately you can't force somebody. And even if they chose to be ID, they may choose to not have their relationship later in life. And so it's really important too, when you're talking to your child, or even just going through the process of knowing, okay, yes, we're choosing an ID donor, but it's possible by the time my son turns 18 that donor might not want any part of this. And that's a hard thing to grapple with, but you just have to be mentally prepared and understand that that's a real possibility.
No, Sam, sorry to interrupt you. I have a quick question so I'm in the surrogacy space, and usually when intended parents are matching with a surrogate, they have conversations with them. They get to speak to them and figure out if they're a good match, lay a foundation. Of course, it's a different journey than what a donor would go on with them. But in the donor space, do you get to speak to the donor, whether it be sperm donor or egg donor? I think embryo donor you do, but for sperm and egg, would you get to speak to them before matching with them?
So there's a couple of egg banks that are starting to do that, that have that option. But they don't have that option for every donor, but there are some that are starting to do that. I have yet to see that on the sperm donor side. Not to say it doesn't exist. It may somewhere. It probably does, but I haven't seen that, and it's certainly not mainstream, not yet. For the embryo donation, that's a little bit more unique because a lot of the time for embryo donation, it's going to be, autologous gametes that were used and then later donated. And, so that is a really different thing, I think. But, it's also the embryo donation agencies, LGBTQ people don't always have the same advantages. There are some organizations that are particular in who they will allow embryos to go to. And so it's important to understand what the resources are there and working with an agency that is, inclusive.
What kind of support do intended parents receive throughout the journey?
Not enough, I think. That was a big gap we'd see a lot. We really, when I was at Fairfax, we really prided ourselves on the client facing team who worked with these intended parents through that process. And we found that there was a huge gap in care, in like mental health and support care. And it's not talked about enough. A lot of the clinics will require like a mental health evaluation or like a one-time conversation. And it's really like just kind of checking the box, understanding like those dynamics that I was kind of talking about, the anonymity or lack thereof and no guarantees. But there's not a lot of conversation or support around the long term and what they might be feeling and how they should be having these conversations. There's not a lot of resources. There's just not. I would love to quickly plug the Donor Conceive community, which is a great organization that is really working hard to support donor conceived people, but also being educational and, ensuring that intended parents are being educated and have support, and they have peer support groups and things like that. But there's not enough support, and there really is. It's a huge gap.
And that's so unfortunate, right? Because they're trying to do what everybody else does. And so why shouldn't they receive the same amount of support that is available elsewhere? So I like actually at the end of this, if you can give us the contact for donor, you said, what was it called?
Donor Conceive Community. Mm-hmm.
Donor Conceive Community. We'll put it up on our Instagram, and we'll link it on the saved version of this live, just so people can access it if they didn't know it existed. So I know you did touch on this a little bit, but can you just give us kind of like an overview of unique considerations for queer couples or individuals when it would come to like donor selection, legal concerns, embryo creation, because we know it is different, unfortunately, in some places. So could you just give us like a little bit of an overview or give us share some of your knowledge from that space?
Yeah, I think it's important to again, whatever agency or bank or whoever you're working with, understanding and ensuring that they're inclusive. Most are, and it's fantastic. And when I say inclusive, like, I part of the vetting usually is having these conversations with donors. Like, you understand that your gametes can go to a same-sex couple, right? Like, you have to be okay with that essentially. And that's great. And they do, a lot of banks do that. And that's really helpful. I think when, otherwise, I mean, the journey is actually not that different, but it is important to kind of explore the different options. For women, reciprocal IVF is a big thing that's being done, where that's, for those who don't know, it's when one woman, has her eggs retrieved and creates embryos, and then the other partner carries. So that's a really cool thing that you can do, but it's important. Not everybody has the same accessibility. And so just understanding what the options are, what that would look like, and just kind of understanding what you can, what's potentially out there. And then another thing to consider post-conception is understanding what the laws are where you live. And so like in the States, every state is different and the laws are different in each state. And so it's really important to get an attorney who understands assisted reproductive technology and is well versed in the laws. And for example, in the state of Virginia, which is where we had my son, whoever carries the child, that's who's legally the mother or the parent. And so then regardless of biology, and so I had to adopt my son regardless if I was the biological parent or not. And so, but that's different in every state. In some states, it's the biological parent, not the carrying parent. So, and sometimes that's the same person, but sometimes it's not. So getting somebody who's well-versed in that and, signing a birth certificate is a lot of the time not enough protection. I mean, it's great, but it's just not. And so going through an actual proper adoption is what's recommended. And, unfortunately, I don't know the laws in Canada to be able to speak on that and to know what the landscape is like there. But it's important to do your research there and understanding what that's going to look like and what investment you'll need for that. And then on top of that, there's other things to consider too. Like we carry our adoption paperwork. We have a copy in each of our vehicles. We keep a copy on us when we travel by plane. Or especially if we go out of the country, because, you don't know if you're going to be stopped. You don't know if you're going to be asked. You don't know, God forbid, if you get in an accident, you want to be able to have say over what happens with your child's care. So like you have to have these considerations at all times. And so that's why the work is still not done and there's still a lot of work to do, but these are things you have to think about. Wow.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I didn't even think about that, but
yeah,
because I don't have to, right? It's a privilege I have. I'm privileged in that way. I don't have to think about that. But I can see what you mean. Yeah, you want to have that just in case at all times. Wow. Yeah.
So there's so much that goes into this. As someone who's parenting a donor-conceived child, what's something you wish more intended parents knew before starting this process?
I think the educational piece is so important, and it's not education that you're getting a lot of the time from your clinic, from your physician, from your bank, or your agency. And so you have to do it yourself. You have to do the legwork. You have to do the research. There's a lot of like Facebook groups and things, and those are great because they're a source of support, but they're also a source of a lot of bad information. And so it's important to understand, just like anything else, that the information you're getting is reliable and is good information. And it takes effort, and just like anytime you're bringing a child into the world, it takes effort. But I think it's really important for people to listen to the experiences of donor conceived people and to ensure that you're taking the best steps forward to be the best parent you can be, and ensuring that people have, having access to who these people are is important. The donor is half of my son's biology. It's important for him to know his medical history, his family medical history, and just who he is. And I've heard many stories, and some people, of course, the medical piece is always important, and some people don't care to have the relationship, or they're just like, okay, this is my family, my nuclear family in my home or whatever. But some people really feel like they need that piece of them to understand who they are as a person. And I really respect that. And I just want to give my son all the options and opportunities. And I think it's really important that people do their research. And yes, it's important to have a community of other recipient, donor intended parents of donor conceived children, but it's also, you cannot have a full picture or have a full appreciation or understanding without understanding donor conceived people's experience. You cannot. So it's really important, and it's understated.
Fair. Okay, so you've touched on this before, but I just want to circle back and ask you about speaking to your donor conceived child about their origin story.
Mm-hmm.
How can parents prepare for these conversations do you have maybe like 3 pieces of advice that you would offer them, or a couple pieces of advice? What would your pieces of advice be for them?
Normalize it, right? So early and often, that's rule number 1. And
Right.
then 2, normalizing it. So like it's not like you have a sit down and you're like, you have a donor. You know what I mean? Like it should just be very organic. And
Like part of the everyday conversation.
Yeah, as much as humanly possible. And because of me working in the industry, I do get very scientific with my son, and he knows a lot more about sperm and eggs and embryos probably than most average adults. But so we get down to a scientific level that's worked for us. You need a sperm and you need an egg to make an embryo, which hopefully goes on to make a baby. And so I think normalizing it, and if it's easier to go the scientific route, I find it to be helpful. But you also don't want to isolate, or ignore that this is more than just science, and that there's a lot of feelings that come with that. And of course, there are times where my son mentions having a dad, and there are people who have donor conceived children, especially LGBTQ people, they all feel very differently about acknowledging parentage or having a dad versus having a donor. Like this is a very hot topic. And so it's, I'm not going to say what is the right thing. Everybody's opinion is going to be different on that, but I do encourage people to like listen and learn and read and have exposure to different things that work for different people. And as long as you're not neglecting the fact that regardless of how you want to label it, your child is half DNA of another person, then I think that's totally fine. But it's a hot topic. And so those are things I think that need to be considered. And it's really important that if you're doing this with a partner, that these conversations are happening before the child is here, so that everybody's on the same page. And then also you have to think about the family too, like extended family, and how you want to handle those conversations, and having those conversations in advance, and ensuring that your family or your friends or your support systems are on the same page as you, so that they're not saying something completely outrageous like to your kid one day, so there's a lot of layers. And even like when we met my son's brothers and their family for the first time, like we had a phone call with the moms, and we were like, hey, so let's talk about this. We feel really strongly that we want to identify that they're brothers. Are you good with that? Yeah, we're in alignment. Okay, cool. Because if they were in alignment, I don't know that it would have made sense to have that relationship. And so we talked about language, and we talked about ensuring that we're being open and honest. And and it was great. And we're very much aligned, and so these are all conversations that should take place with the partner, with the family, with friends, support systems, because you just don't want to be caught in a situation where you haven't prepared, and you don't have to deal with that or have your child exposed to something that could be traumatic as much as possible. Things are going to happen, but those are some things I would consider.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. A question that's near and dear to my heart. Let's talk about representation. How important is it for donor programs to reflect diverse identities, racially, culturally, and gender-wise?
I think huge. Families come in all different types and ways and cultures, and it's, if you're going to a bank and you don't see yourself or you don't see your family, it makes it really isolating and difficult. And so it is important to have a diverse selection of donors, but it's challenging. It's not easy. And so I think it's really important for people to keep in mind, if you see a bank that's not that diverse, I can probably guarantee it's not for lack of trying. I'm sure that they've all tried, but it's difficult. And also keeping in mind that different cultures, feel differently about egg donation or sperm donation. And so that's really where a lot of, where it's difficult to get certain backgrounds of donors, is because there are other cultural implications that make it extremely difficult. And then especially if they're, more of a minority in the country of donation, then you're really narrowing your pool. If the pool's already small to begin with, if, most banks accept 1% of applicants essentially. And so if you're looking at a cultural group with women or men in a certain age range that pass all of the screening, you're going to come up with a very small number. And so it's not for lack of trying, I can guarantee that, but it is extremely important. And I understand why people get frustrated and don't feel seen and heard when they don't see the reflection of their family in the banks. It's challenging, and I think it's a challenge that will continue to exist. But it's hard. It's a tough one.
It's definitely hard. So I'm in this space because I'm an intended single mom by choice.
Mhm.
So I've already searched sperm donors, and I was fine with a mixed family. And now I may have to also use an egg donor. And I find it's very difficult because when you're looking at the banks, sometimes it's zero, sometimes it's very few. I would love to encourage people from my culture to donate more.
Yeah, it is tough. And then when you do get those donors that come along, they go really quickly. And especially on the egg side, you only get so many, right? And so it's challenging. It really is. And I empathize a lot with that. And I'm hopeful that in the future we'll see more of that. But the other thing I like to tell intended parents when they're going through their donor search, whether it be sperm or egg or whatever, I think it's also really important to think about what your non-negotiables are versus like your wish list, because you're not going to find somebody that checks all the boxes. And so it's really important of really, what are the things that I really can't get over that I really, really need, and work backward. Because if you start with, okay, these are all the things I want, you're just going to prolong everything and you're not going to get someone who's perfect, So I like to always throw that in there. And sometimes, you just have to figure out what's best for you and for your family. But yeah, you can't, you have to give somewhere, unfortunately.
Okay. Switching gears again. Thank you for sharing, and Joy, thank you for being open about that, because
thank you.
It's not an easy thing to talk about. Okay, so this one, I'm sure you're going to have a lot for us about this. So we know that the LGBTQIA plus community, they just feel like they aren't really seen or prioritized in the fertility world as of yet. We know that things are happening, but it's still not where it should be. So what are the biggest barriers that you see, and what change do you see happening to address those barriers?
So,
if any, I don't know. Maybe there's no changes happening in some areas. So what's going on? What's happening?
It's, again, it's so dependent on where you're at. But I, unfortunately, especially, in the US, there's a lot of fear of things going backward. And even though there's a lot of excitement around, there being talk about IVF coverage and things like that, there's also very, there's very clear documentation about when some of these announcements have been made about IVF coverage, about it being for mothers and fathers. And so it's scary. It's scary for the community to not only like worry about access, because access has always been a barrier. I mean, there's lots of literature out there about marginalized communities just in life, being in different places and having different access to all kinds of things, including fertility care. And so I think it's scary for a lot of people, and we should be moving forward, and sometimes it doesn't feel that way. But I think as far as representation, I feel really, when it comes to the clinicians and the banks and all the various players in the space, I feel really good about the fertility industry's commitment to all people. I really do. I feel like clinics and all of those players are very inclusive. And for the most part, there are a couple outliers, but for the most part, people are very, very inclusive and welcome our community into getting care. But I think the financially is the biggest piece, and just having access to care. And then also, you know, some people don't have support systems. Some people have been rejected by their families. So, you know, I think there's so many layers, and it's really hard to kind of talk about what progress is being made. But I do feel like the fertility space does a really amazing job at trying to be inclusive and supportive of all people. And I feel really proud to work in the community and to work in the fertility industry. And so I think we'll get there. Can we always do better? Yes. But I don't think like all hope is lost. And it makes me a little sad to hear that people don't feel represented, because I would like to learn a little bit more about what that means. And, you know, and I would love to hear from more people about how they feel like they can be better represented in this space. Oh, Joy, I think you're muted.
Sorry, guys. That's embarrassing. So in your work with egg banks, what initiatives or practices have made a real difference in supporting queer families?
You know, it's simple things like ensuring that the pictures you're using in your materials and in your website reflect a diverse population of people, and LGBTQ people included in that. I know there's a conference called Men Having Babies that you know, I've been to many times and that we've supported, and there's other groups like Rainbow Families and a few others that you know, we've been involved with to just make sure people have access to banks, to information, to support, and I you know, the banks and again the community does a great job at getting involved with groups like that. And, you know, Pride, we've always, you know, a lot of the companies go to their Pride in their area. So, you know, those are some of the ways I think that banks, you know, get involved and show their support for the LGBTQ community.
Okay, so on that note, if clinics came to you and said, Sam, what advice do you have for us? We're looking to better support our LGBTQIA plus clients. What can we do to support them better? What can we do to make them feel included and make this a more inclusive space? What would you tell them, honest and raw?
The one gap I continue to see is like people aren't up on the lingo, you know, and documents being inclusive is huge. That I feel like that's a continuous problem, is like just ensure
the documents are from like the 1950s and they haven't updated them.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And, you know, I think something so simple like that is overlooked a lot because it's just something that people don't think about. But when you go to a clinic and it like, you know, and it says intended father and there is no father in this situation, it's like kind of off-putting. You're like, oh, like you said, is this 1950? You don't know how to just have gender neutral documents.
Parent? Does it have to be? It can't just be like intended parent A and like it's like yeah.
Well, and there's been a lot of shift, and like that was something I was really proud that we did at the bank was, you know, we went and we full support from everybody from all levels. Like, yes, let's make sure our documents are as neutral as possible, even down to like, you know, the HIPAA. Like it used to be like a female HIPAA and a male HIPAA, and we actually changed it to carrying person's HIPAA.
Wow.
Sperm source. We moved away from like male or
female.
You know, but like for sperm, like you know, we would say like sperm source as a general terminology instead of like, you know, male partner or whatever. And for carrying person, same thing when you're thinking about who's carrying. And so those were huge things I did that, you know, we did that I'm super proud of. And I think a lot of places have followed suit. There's still a lot of places that need some work on the administrative side to just be inclusive. And, you know, they'll have brochures and things with like, you know, gay couples on them, but then like you get the paperwork and it seems a bit outdated. So those are little small things that I think clinics can do to be more inclusive and to just think about ways you can just make people feel comfortable, and it doesn't take a lot of effort.
Yeah, and to the clinics and agencies or wherever they go, it's just changing words on a paper. But to the people reading them, it's making such a world of difference, right? Making them feel like they're included, making them feel like they belong where they're going to go and they're going to get adequate and fair treatment and they're being considered. And all you really have to do is change a word. You change words here and there, right? It's not a huge process or a huge body of work to do, and it would foster so much change for people that are affected by it, right? So I think some places need to do better, definitely, and take a look and maybe look inside and be like, why haven't I done this yet? It's so easy. It's such an easy change to make. But yeah,
for sure.
Good point.
So we've had a few questions from our community. So we'd like to take a few moments to bring in their voices. You touched upon this a little bit. Can you explain reciprocal IVF to our viewers, and maybe you can share some stories about it?
Sure. We went through reciprocal IVF. So basically you have one person who undergoes actual IVF. So they take the injections, they have their eggs retrieved, they create embryos, and then the embryo, instead of being transferred back into the person whose eggs were retrieved, the embryo is transferred into the other partner. And so it's a nice way, for, I think, everybody to feel involved if you can do it. And it's a nice way to have connection kind of on multiple levels, but it is, if you're going through IVF, for the most part, it's not going to be a big change. It shouldn't be really a change in cost or anything else, because it's the same exact process. You might have a little bit more blood work and paperwork and stuff like that, but it's a nice way, for I think, for there to be levels of connection, and it's a fairly easy process.
And then when going through that, I mean, you don't have to share your personal story, just if you know knowledge of just in general reciprocal IVF, do you share with the child early on, like, you are biologically related to this parent, and not like, how do you address that with the child?
I've seen it handled a lot of different ways. I've seen people, again, early and honest, and just like, in passing, just kind of whatever. Your child is probably going to know who is carrying them. And so then that's a really personal decision as to how you handle that. I've heard some people say, like, we'll just kind of leave it up to them, and if they want to know, we'll tell them, so it's very personal, but I think there's a lot of ways you can do it. And I think the most important thing is just like ensuring that you and your partner, if you have one, are on the same page for how you want to handle that.
Got it. Okay.
And what can straight people do to be more inclusive?
That's a good one. That's a good question. I think generally speaking, I think assumptions are, nobody should have them about anything, probably. I think that's always helpful, is like probably not to assume things. Also, I think just being an ally means being like, I think it's important, if you're going to identify yourself as an ally, that you're true to what that means in its purest form. And that means allyship through it all, right? And so it's a loaded question. You guys are really good with that one. So I think education is important, and educating yourself. And I don't have a problem with people asking me, or my friends asking me, like, questions about things. I'd rather them ask me and have the uncomfortable conversations so that they know what's what. But I think educating yourself and just like being an ally in its truest form from start to finish is really important, because just like any other marginalized community, like, you can't do it by yourself. You need allyship. And again, I think we're getting there, but sometimes it feels like we're going backwards. And so and I think I've seen so much progress, and especially in language, right? Language is so powerful. And so I think it's also important that people just really think about what they say before they say it. And also truly being able to see that the T is in LGBT, and us and the rest of the letters have a responsibility to be allies to our trans friends, and it's huge and it's important and it's not done enough, and we have a responsibility. And so yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think being an ally is huge, and to all the letters, you can't be selective. You're either in or you're out. There's no in between. And so I think and somebody, people know people, whether you know it or not. So I think it's important for people to kind of just take a step back, and we're all just doing our best out here. That's all we can do. We're just trying to make
rough world out there.
What are you gonna do? So
yeah, for sure. Well, Sam, thank you for sharing your story, your insights, your knowledge, your heart. Your work is truly making such a difference, and you're carrying a huge load, for sure. But I feel like you are so into it, and you're just ready to keep going and ready to keep fighting the good fight. So thank you for sharing all of that with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great, and it's an important conversation. So thank you for highlighting the community and for giving me a chance to speak about it.
And if people want to learn more about Reproductive Solution or connect with you, where can they go?
Yeah, so they certainly can reach out to me directly. My email is smarple@reproductive.solutions.com. Or I'm sorry, there's no .com. I can't even get my own email address right. Solutions, that's it. smarple@reproductive solutions. And then our website is rsifertility.com. And to quickly go over what we do is we have sperm collection and isolation device for the lab we have some really, really great strong data coming out about how it can contribute to positive outcomes in IVF and IUI. So if anybody's interested in learning about it, they can find me and ask more questions.
All right. Thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight. If you're navigating donor conception, LGBTQIA+ family building, or just need support, we see you, we're with you, and we hope tonight reminded you that you're not alone.
We'll see you next Wednesday for another episode of Fertility Village Live. Good night, everyone.